Today I'm using the medium version of alien clay. I chose this clay because of its versatility and easy use. It holds very fine detail and allows me to soften into various stages. This lets me quickly build up the model by getting the clay on fast and sculpting in my fine details as it cools, making for a fun, easy project without needs to struggle with the clay. I'm starting this project off by using a hardened foam armature to apply our alien clay over top of it. Resin eye forms were fitted into the foam armature before putting the hardened layer on it. The first thing I do is open the alien clay container and remove the clay wedges so I can take the dividing paper out. I then proceed to put the clay wedges that I need back into the container and replace the lid before putting it into a dedicated warming oven to soften. I'm setting the warmer to 125 Fahrenheit in order to soften it to a point that it will be easier to apply to my armature. After 2 hours in the oven, the alien clay is softened enough to pull out and start working with. The softened alien clay is easy to manipulate and sticks to the armature well. This way, I can build up large volumes of clay very quickly and be able to start laying in my forms right away. At this point, I'm just starting to put clay on and moving and pushing it around with my fingers. When you first apply the alien clay, moving the clay around with your hands before using any tool is an important first step to establish roughing into the sculpt. Early on, I found out my eye forms I originally put in were not the right size. So it's an easy correction by just adding layers of alien clay over top to make sure I get the eye forms correct and the model I'm trying to make. The adhesive nature of clay allows it to stick easily to the resin eye forms. The tool I'm using here is a ribbon tool. A lot of people start off with a rake tool. I generally like to start off with a ribbon tool because it cuts larger volumes off of clay very efficiently and I'm able to get my forms roughed in very quickly. I then move to a wire tool. The alien clay is very responsive and the wire tool cuts very precise lines in the alien clay cleanly with minimal stick to the tool itself. This allows me to hone in on my forms and my symmetry. At this point in the process, I'm just adding more softened clay where I need it, cutting down and smoothing with the clay tools and my hands to continue to build up my forms. The tool here is just a larger ribbon tool for larger areas to cut off into the clay and get my forms roughly smoothed in. Because of the adhesive nature of the clay, it is easy to build forms off the model and stick them on the model afterwards. At this point, I'm able to cut in more precise details into those pieces. This project requires more than the 4 3/4 pounds of clay the original alien container holds, so alien clay does come in bulk packaging in 38-pound boxes. The first thing I do is unwrap the alien clay and cut it apart. It's conveniently pre-scored for making cutting it easier. I just use a metal scraper to cut it into pieces. Once I cut off what I need, I put it back in my original alien clay container and place it back into my dedicated clay warming oven. I'm going to be working on the back of the head, roughing it in, so I'm going to up my temp on my oven to 145 Fahrenheit in order to soften it to the point of being able to use a stick and spread the clay on quickly. I'm constantly going back and forth to make sure my forms are staying in symmetry. It's always a good practice to not fixate too long on one area at this stage, but to keep moving around the piece to establish that good base. Once I have my forms in generally where I want them to be, then I'll start refining my sculpt. And this is when I grab my rake tool. What a rake tool does is it starts evening out all the high and low areas of the form. It also helps to give the clay a tooth to be able to stick new clay to as needed. Alien clay does a great job of not clogging up my tools as I rake. This makes for a very consistent, even modeling piece. So you see, we have a piece that's starting to come together. The whole thing's been raked, and you can see the forms are starting to have a lot more symmetry now. Everything is looking fairly smooth and even. I'm going back in and using the wire tool to cut in more precise detail. Due to the responsiveness of the clay, using the wire tool does give me some nice, sharp, clean lines. With how well the clay responds to the tool, I can almost use the tool like a drawing pencil to map out areas that need to have more definition in it. The nice thing about using the wire tool in the alien clay is that you can drag into it, using it to soften those lines up and making them more organic. This technique that I'm doing here is placing a plastic baggie on top of the clay. What this does is it doesn't allow any sharp hard lines in the clay. So when you press into the clay with the tool, it actually rounds the clay for you, which gives me the nice organic skin texture that I'm after. After each application using a bag, I will saturate my clay piece with isopropyl alcohol. The alcohol slightly dissolves the surface, which allows even more softening of the texture, and gives me that more organic look to all the wrinkles and texture that I'm putting into the clay. Even though I'm trying to vary my hand rhythm and pressure to give it that organic feel, the alcohol softening up those details really take it a step further. I'm laying in more clay, taking my tools and working it. All this is really just adding layers upon layers of detail. As I start going into more and more of the details of each individual section I'm doing, the tools are getting smaller to reflect that the details are getting finer. For this next section, I'm making a slurry. A slurry basically is just dissolving the alien clay in naphtha to break it down and make it a very low viscosity I can use to brush and dap this slurry onto the model. Right now it looks very big and bulky on the model, but once the naphtha evaporates, it's going to leave behind nice little skin pimples or goose pimples on the skin. It's just another technique to use to give me a very natural look to my sculpt. For the sides of the head, I'm using the same technique I used on the chin. This time though, I use less naphtha to dissolve the clay, which makes my slurry more viscous and gives me bigger bumps. I'm going for a more frog-like texture here. I'm using the same batch of slurry this time to attach to the shaft of the mine probe, using it as a glue to adhere this little piece to the front of the alien. What this does is it allows the clay to bond to itself much better without having to use a lot of pressure and perhaps distorting your piece when doing so. The alien has tubes running the top of his head with muscle fiber coming out of them that controls the eyebrows and other facial features. These tubes, I want to make them nice and smooth. I use a variety of techniques to define different areas of the sculpt, giving it different textures along the way. I decided I wanted to give the alien gills, just to make it a little bit more unique and interesting. So what I'm doing is designing some gills on a piece of cardboard, and I'm going to use them as another armature on top of the existing sculpt. I'm using the slurry again because it helps act like a glue to attach these cardboard gills to the sculpt. This is going to allow me to just manipulate the clay much easier without trying to force those pieces to stay in place. Once the solvent evaporates and the slurry hardens, these armature pieces are stuck nicely in place. I go back and heat the alien clay to a brushable consistency this time, and apply clay onto the cardboard pieces. By making it brushable consistency, it allows me to put a lot of clay down without stressing the fragile cardboard armature and risking it wanting to fall off. Once the clay is cooled, I go back with a ribbon tool and just start smoothing the clay out. And then again, I'll switch back and forth between a ribbon tool and a wire tool just to even out the whole piece. I rolled out ribbons of clay to use as spines on the gills, and then just taking a wooden tool and blending the spines into the rest of the clay. The final step is to go back with a piece of plastic like we do with the other sections and define those gill areas. Going back to the top of the head, I went ahead and used some slurry to put a probe-like fork on it, and once dried, I started smoothing it out. For a final step, I'm using a butane torch. What this does is it slightly melts the surface of the clay. The melted clay, once cooled, imparts a nice glossy look to the clay. This was a fun, quick project. Due to the versatility of the alien clay, I could build up the armature quickly, and once the clay cooled back down, able to easily rake and add texture and detail to it. It is one of the most responsive clays I ever worked with. The ease of working it with solvents for blending and smoothing aided in my ability to just have fun with the clay and this project, instead of having to fight with the clay to make it do what I want it to do. Thank you for watching. For more info, go to alienclay.com.